Well, could BillyWitchDoctor.com maybe raise something else from the dead, bigger than a chicken?
Mega Ultra Chicken? No, shh, he is legend.
For this Halloween episode, I chose an eerie post-apocalyptic novel, I Am Legend. However, I will also include 2 of the 3 films that were based off the source material. The one with Charlton Heston called The Omega Man, and the one with Will Smith called I Am Legend. There's a 3rd film, but unfortunately I will not be covering that one this time. Sorry, Vincent Price. Now, because this is a video, I will be using images and clips from both of those movies to supplement the novel's summary. I Am Legend was written by Richard Matheson in 1954. It follows the main character, Robert Neville, who is most likely the sole survivor of a worldwide war and resulting contagion that has turned every man, woman, and child into vampires. Think Dracula copy-pasted a million times over. They have pale skin, they suck blood, and they can't go out in daylight. However, they also hate garlic, crucifixes, and mirrors. All they needed were capes and bad accents, and Bram Stoker would be proud. By day, Neville goes around stabbing all of his former friends and neighbors with a wooden stake while they sleep. They then turn into piles of goo, liquefying in front of his eyes.
No! Oh my God! So much blood!
His other daytime task is scavenging for supplies. At night, the vampires awaken. Ben Cortman is his former friend and neighbor who comes outside every day and taunts him outside of his house. Ben tells Neville that he'll kill him with his host of followers, but Neville has designed traps and ways to keep them at bay. Occasionally, throughout the short novel, there are flashbacks in which you see what happens to Neville's wife and daughter and how they succumb to the disease. Suffering from depression and drinking way too much, or too little, depending on how you view the situation, Neville decides that he's going to find the source of the contagion and understand it and its hosts better. He goes to the local library and pulls some books to see if there are any symptoms that match what the vampires are exhibiting. Lo and behold, a certain strain of bacteria matches many of the symptoms. Now he has something to work with. Viewing samples of dead tissue under a microscope, he discovers that the bacteria is actually allergic to sunlight and garlic, hence why the people are. But what he also learns through experimentation with incapacitated or unconscious vampires is something that, through my research, I learned is called hysterical blindness. Hysterical blindness is a condition where people react a certain way to a stimulus based on how they feel the stimulus should treat them or how they should react to it. Therefore, the aversions to crucifixes and mirrors is actually psychosomatic, and the people are not actual vampires in the Transylvanian sense. But the coincidences are unmistakable, and Matheson really modeled his villains after the mythological creatures to a T, particularly Bram Stoker's.
Indeed.
Neville realizes that there are actually 2 different kinds of vampires. I call them sentient and feral. The sentient ones were able to retain their ability to speak, their ability to think, and even to outwit Neville at times. Basically, the former group retained their faculties, albeit looking like Marilyn Manson's entourage. The latter group was actually reanimated by the bacteria after they died, so all they worry about or are concerned by is biting and killing. Thus, the zombie archetype was born. At one point in the story, Neville tries to save a dying stray dog by gaining its trust painstakingly every day. Unfortunately, it dies. It was a particularly sad part of the story, watching this poor innocent animal trying to survive, and the only one in probably the whole world who could possibly or would possibly help him is the one he's most afraid of. After about 3 years or so, a woman shows up at his doorstep. Her name is Ruth. She claims to be a fellow survivor, and he welcomes her in. They get along very well, even sharing a bed at one point, and Neville is actually going over his findings with Ruth. He shares with her information about the disease itself, his hypothesis for why he's immune. He says he was bitten by a vampire bat some years ago. Very on the nose, I know. And how he hopes to treat the infected. When he prepares to test her to see if she's infected, in the hopes of curing her, she knocks him unconscious. When he comes to, he finds a note from Ruth explaining herself. She herself is a vampire, having been infected while alive. She also notes that Neville had killed her husband some time before. As people live with the disease, she writes, they are overcoming it and learning to live with it. In fact, a new society is forming. She warns him to escape the city and his impending doom. Love, it seems, has won out, as she could have just killed him when he was unconscious. However, Neville doesn't listen to her, thinking that if this is a new society and there are rules and structures like the old society, that he would go to the vampires and be able to speak to them and even reason with them. However, that thought quickly goes away when he watches the sentient vampires destroy some feral vampires right outside his home. In a panic, not seeing this before, he shoots at them. They return fire, wounding him. When they go in and take him, he's brought to this new society. While he's in prison awaiting his execution, Ruth visits him. She's a senior member of this society now, sort of a leader, and while the rest want him dead, she doesn't. Again, I think love won out to some degree. She hands him some cyanide pills, kisses him, and leaves. Before she leaves, Neville pleads with her not to let this new society become too heartless. Finally, he looks out his window at the people as the pills take hold. The vampires are watching with anger and hatred and fear. He's a living legend, soon to be a dead one, and his final thoughts are whether they'll think of him in the same superstitious way as people have been thinking about vampires for centuries. He wonders if he'll be a cryptid, if you will, in their society, for he is legend. The book is 160 pages, so it's a pretty quick read, but there's a lot of information throughout that keeps the story moving. I thought it flowed really well, although I do feel two ways about the vampire angle. On the one hand, I enjoyed how Matheson incorporated biological and scientific reasoning to try to see if he could explain why the vampires are acting the way they are, and also why they would have aversions to things that really have no actual basis in hurting them, such as crucifixes and mirrors. Also, the theme of being another monster's monster is actually really interesting to me, because he went from being the last surviving human, which we all can really relate to now being like a pariah in this new society that probably would have had more people in it if he hadn't been killing them for 3 or 4 years. However, I also felt like it was shoehorning the vampire themes and traits really hard into the story when it could have been maybe a little bit more subtle, or there could have been some nods to these vampire traits without throwing them in there too ham-fistedly, if that's even a word. Perhaps the only thing I really would criticize Matheson for is the fact that it's so literal with its vampire tropes. Maybe creating like a different set of symptoms or combining mythological symptoms maybe into a new creature or a new issue would have been a little bit more unique, and it wouldn't have been so on the nose, as I said before, where it feels like, okay, I know what vampires are, but then the question remains, are the mythological creatures real? And in this world, they just combined with the vampires? Are they the feral vampires? In a way, I just think that it would have been a little bit more interesting to combine certain things. The hysterical blindness was something that I learned recently in this research, but at the same time, that doesn't really always explain why they should act the way they do. Images dance in my head of 100 cloaked figures with fangs. It's a small issue, I think, and a nitpick probably for me, because at the end of it, Matheson did a great job bringing everything together into one cohesive story. Speaking of cloaked pale mutants, I actually wanted to talk about the 2 movies that I referenced earlier that came about as a result of this source material. Again, sorry Vincent Price, I just didn't have time for you. Now, in the Charlton Heston flick from 1971, The Omega Man, the creators really leaned into the Dracula tropes. They pretty much look exactly as you think they would. They're pale, they wear cloaks, they have fangs. They also call themselves the Family, which if you saw my video on Fallout 3, that name should sound familiar. They're the enemy in the subway who's allegedly killing the people on the bridge. If you haven't seen my video on Fallout 3, check it out on my channel. In this movie, instead of being bitten by a vampire bat, Neville is using an experimental vaccine to immunize himself. Instead of being captured by the vampires at the end of the movie and killed, he's actually caught and about to be burned alive when he's assisted by some fellow survivors. They hole up with him and decide on what to do next. There's some back and forth about saving the family, destroying them, or leaving the city altogether. A character, Lisa, who basically replaces Ruth in the story, she becomes part of the family. She lets them into Neville's home and they all attack him. He flees his home and watches as they burn his home and his belongings. As he tries to shoot at them on the balcony, his gun jams.
Damn it, it's not jammed. Lisa. Lisa.
I want you.
light.
As his gun jams, that alerts the vampires on the balcony, who throw a spear at him, mortally wounding him. The next day, the other survivors find him dying in a fountain, and he gives them the serum before he dies himself. They leave the city, and you don't really know what happens to them after that. The Will Smith vehicle, on the other hand, is much closer to the book in terms of isolation. There are no sentient vampires in this movie. It's all feral and beastly monsters that are attacking him. In fact, no one talks to him through the first 2/3 of the movie. It was a huge break from both the Charlton Heston movie and from the novel itself. He has a dog, Sam, already in the beginning of the movie, as opposed to trying to find a stray dog like in the novel. Sam's story is very heartbreaking, as it seems the vampires are becoming a little bit smarter in this movie. They lay a trap for Neville at one point in the movie, after he captured an infected woman to try his vaccine on. The trap knocks him unconscious, and when he awakens, he and his dog fight off other infected dogs. However, in the process, Sam is bit. He brings her back to his lab and injects the vaccine into her when this happens. Now filled with rage and hatred, he goes out on a suicide mission to take out as many vampires as he possibly can. But as he's about to die, he is actually saved by 2 other survivors, Anna and Ethan. They take him back to his home while he recuperates. They tell Neville that they believe there is a safe haven somewhere in Virginia, but Neville disagrees. Having followed Anna's scent, something that Neville had been careful to cover up, the vampires track them back to Neville's home, where they attack. At the end, Neville locks them in basically a safe with the serum and tells them that if they do find this safe haven, they need to give it to the authorities right away. It turns out, the infected woman is turning back to human. After Neville blows him and the alpha male up with a grenade, Anna and Ethan make their way to Virginia, where they do give the serum to the authorities. I thought out of the 3 endings, this one was actually the worst, because it was that total Hollywood big bang at the end sort of ending. The novel ending was great because there was more of a thematic, sad, but at the same time, interesting conclusion. And in the other movie, you don't really know what happens to the survivors or whether they live. Actually, the ending of The Omega Man reminds me of The Mist, the book. Let me know in the comments if you want me to discuss The Mist in another video. My writing focus today is a scary one that's lurking in the shadows of all self-publishers. It's the dreaded marketing monster threatening to gobble up your finances. But seriously, it's a rough reality, a post-apocalyptic one if you can call it that. One where you think you've finished your beautiful, amazing, possibly next great American novel, and you drop it into the sea of a million just like it. It's a sea of despair, really, one that I had to come to grips with over time. The fact is that it takes a very long time to write a novel of any quality, and it also takes a lot of money to do so. Now, specifically referring to people who want to try to earn money, if you want to just write a book and share it with the world as is, then God bless. It really does suck to have to go through the process of creating a 300, 400, 500-page book with multiple drafts and edits, a book cover, ISBNs, and things of that nature, and instantly just become one drop in the ocean. You may legitimately have the next great American novel on your hands, but if no one's around to read it, who's going to know about it? Plenty of marketing options out there, but one that I particularly want to warn everyone to stay away from are those social media marketing scammers. You announce that you've created a novel, and you get bombarded with messages like, "Hello, beautiful author. I see that you've made a book, but I only see that you've X amount of copies. I can fix that all for you." If you're in one of these groups, you probably already know what I mean. This is becoming a joke amongst people in those groups. They even all write the same. I feel like it's maybe even 1 or 2 people creating all these accounts to try and scam people out of money. Just beware. Now, for me, I use written word media, not a sponsor, for my marketing strategies like building email lists and getting the word out about discounts. However, a word of warning, as with any marketing that you might do, it can get pricey, especially if you're trying to do something consistently on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. Another thing I would consider is trying to find a beta reader service who can read your work and give you some feedback before you send it out to market. You can also go another route, which is very possible, and have what are called Advanced Review Copy, or ARC, readers. Their job, unlike beta readers, is to give you an honest review after your book hits market. All of these are paid options. There are some free ones available, such as social media and trying to get the word out there for yourself. Another thing you might want to do is go on someone else's podcast to talk about your book, as I did with Just Takes a Village. Check out the video on my channel. Finally, you can do what I'm doing right now, just creating a podcast or a channel and talking about what you love and why. I hope that this is a way that I can connect with all the people out there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate it. Do you see parts that you would combine to make it the best version of itself? And please, if you can, take a minute to check out my novel, The Vital Link, the first book in the series A Spark in the Ashes. And also, Novel 2, I can finally announce, is coming out December 1st. It will be released as an audiobook, ebook, and paperback, just as the first one was. Stay tuned. I mean, a vampire bat, really? He couldn't be more on the nose. But hey,
He is legend.